As we approach a critical period in American politics, President Joe Biden finds himself facing a situation of unprecedented urgency and complexity. With the specter of a possible second Trump administration looming large, President Biden is faced with a unique opportunity to leverage one of the most powerful tools of his office, the pardon power. This constitutional authority, enshrined in Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, grants the president the ability to issue pardons and reprieves for federal offenses. While this power is often seen as a mechanism of mercy or reconciliation, its potential for political strategy is rarely discussed in such a high-stakes context. In the face of a potential retribution-driven agenda from the incoming Trump administration, Biden is now exploring the possibility of using the pardon power not just for individual cases, but as a political weapon, a protective pardon designed to shield key allies and political figures from persecution in a new regime. The discussion surrounding this potential move has sparked debates among legal experts, political commentators, and even conservative voices who recognize the unique opportunity Biden has to shape the future of American democracy. This video will examine why Biden may be on the verge of a strategic checkmate that could not only protect individuals at risk, but also define the legacy of his presidency in the face of a potential Trump resurgence. 1. Understanding the pardon power, a core presidential authority. Before delving into the specifics of how Biden might wield the pardon power as a political weapon, it's important to understand the scope and significance of this authority. The U.S. Constitution grants the president the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. This sweeping power has been used throughout history in moments of national crisis, as well as to provide mercy to individuals convicted of federal crimes. What makes the pardon power particularly potent, however, is the wide latitude it gives the president in determining who is pardoned and under what circumstances. The U.S. Supreme Court has reinforced the idea that the pardon power is an inherent and core aspect of presidential authority. In fact, in a landmark decision on presidential immunity, the court stated that this power could be wielded without judicial interference. This has led some legal scholars to argue that the pardon power is almost limitless, providing the president with the ability to shield individuals from prosecution, even in cases where bribery or misconduct may have been involved in the issuance of the pardon. In recent years, this expansive view of the pardon power has gained traction among legal experts and political commentators alike. For example, in the wake of the controversial Trump administration, which saw the use of pardons for political allies and personal associates, the question of whether such uses of the pardon power were appropriate or even legal has come to the forefront. While many legal experts acknowledge the broad scope of the power, there is growing concern that it could be abused to further a political agenda. This concern has given rise to calls for greater oversight or reform of the pardon process, particularly in the context of an incoming Trump regime. 2. The concept of a protective pardon, shielding allies from persecution. One of the most talked about ideas in recent political discourse is the notion of a protective pardon. This term, although not formally recognized in legal jargon, refers to the idea that a president could use the pardon power to shield individuals from persecution or legal retribution, particularly in cases where a political transition threatens to expose them to prosecution under a new regime. The idea of issuing a protective pardon is not entirely new. In fact, President Gerald Ford's controversial pardon of Richard Nixon in the 1970s set a precedent for the use of the pardon power to protect individuals from legal consequences. Ford's decision, which was widely criticized at the time, was made in the interest of healing the nation after the Watergate scandal. Although Ford believed the pardon was necessary for national reconciliation, he also carried with him a sense of the political risks involved, acknowledging that accepting the pardon could be seen as an implicit admission of guilt. Today, the political context has shifted. President Biden, facing the potential re-emergence of Donald Trump and a retaliatory agenda, might see issuing a protective pardon as a way to safeguard key allies and political figures from the possible weaponization of the legal system. While the media often refers to these moves as preemptive pardons, this term is somewhat misleading, as there is no legal distinction between a pardon issued before or after charges are filed. The real focus should be on the intent behind the pardon, to prevent individuals from being politically targeted by an incoming regime. For example, figures like former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who played a pivotal role in investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, could be at risk of prosecution under a Trump-led government. As political retribution looms, Biden may consider issuing a pardon to protect her and others who are likely to be targets of a politically motivated investigation. The same goes for other individuals in positions of power or influence, such as Department of Justice officials, whose roles in holding Trump accountable could make them targets of a Trump administration's wrath. 3. The challenge of defining the scope of the pardon. Broad or narrow? One of the key challenges that Biden will face in using the pardon power for protective purposes is determining the scope of the pardon. For example, if a protective pardon were issued for Liz Cheney, would it extend to her staff members? Or would it protect only her personally? If Biden issues a broad pardon that covers entire organizations or government departments, such as the Department of Justice, it could invite significant backlash from Trump supporters and MAGA-aligned figures, who would argue that such a move amounts to an overreach or an abuse of presidential power. The political fallout from issuing a broad pardon could be significant, and Biden must carefully consider how much protection to provide and to whom. The broader the pardon, the greater the risk of it being challenged by opponents in the courts. The risk, however, is that by offering narrower protections, Biden might inadvertently leave key individuals vulnerable to persecution under a new regime. One way to avoid this challenge is by issuing a blanket pardon, similar to the approach taken by President Jimmy Carter in the 1970s. Carter issued a blanket pardon to individuals who had evaded the draft during the Vietnam War without naming specific individuals. This strategy helped avoid the creation of a political enemy list while still offering protection to a group of people at risk of prosecution. Biden could consider a similar approach, offering a blanket pardon to those who might be targeted by a future administration, without specifying individual names or targets. 4. The importance of timing. Pardon before the storm. Timing is another crucial consideration in Biden's potential use of the pardon power. While the president has the authority to issue pardons at any time, the political and legal ramifications of doing so during a transitional period are significant. As the 2024 election approaches, Biden may find himself in a position where he must act quickly to protect individuals at risk, particularly in the event that Trump's legal battles intensify after a potential second term. As political analysts have pointed out, issuing pardons shortly before the inauguration of a new president, or even on the morning of January 20th, would send a powerful signal. This could not only protect key allies but also act as a political statement, signaling Biden's commitment to defending democracy against any attempts to weaponize the legal system for political retribution. 5. Expanding the scope. Pardons for nonviolent offenders. In addition to protecting political figures from persecution, Biden's use of the pardon power could also extend to nonviolent offenders, particularly those incarcerated for drug-related crimes. Thousands of individuals remain imprisoned for offenses that are no longer viewed as significant threats to public safety, such as possession or distribution of marijuana. With changing public attitudes toward marijuana use and an increasing number of states legalizing the drug, the pardon power could be a key tool in addressing these outdated laws. By issuing pardons to individuals convicted of nonviolent offenses, Biden could demonstrate his commitment to criminal justice reform and rehabilitation. This would not only benefit the individuals involved but also send a message that the Biden administration is focused on creating a more equitable legal system, one that prioritizes fairness over political retribution. 6. Pardon Trump? A controversial move with deep implications. One of the most controversial uses of the pardon power would be for Biden to issue a pardon for Donald Trump himself. While this move would not be a protective pardon in the traditional sense, it would not shield Trump from potential prosecution in the same way it might protect others, It could be seen as a way to avoid further political turmoil and to signal a willingness to move forward as a nation. However, such a move would be deeply divisive, potentially alienating Biden's political base and raising questions about the message it sends regarding accountability. President Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon provides a historical context for such a decision. Ford famously pardoned Nixon in the wake of the Watergate scandal, and while the decision was heavily criticized at the time, it allowed the country to move past the scandal. Ford himself acknowledged the political risks of the pardon, and it ultimately hurt his chances in the 1976 election. For Biden, the decision to pardon Trump would be fraught with similar risks, though it may be politically necessary to avoid the kind of retribution that could destabilize the country. As President Biden approaches this critical juncture in his presidency, the decision to wield the pardon power as a strategic tool will be one of the most consequential choices of his administration. Whether he chooses to issue broad protective pardons, act decisively against politically motivated prosecutions, or even extend pardons to nonviolent offenders, the outcome will significantly impact the future of American democracy. The question remains, can Biden checkmate Trump before he even gets into office? While the pardon power offers a strong avenue for defense, it is not without its risks. The challenge for Biden will be to balance the need for protection with the potential for political backlash. However, as we've seen throughout history, bold political moves often come with deep consequences. In the case of Biden's potential use of the pardon power, the stakes couldn't be higher. It is clear that in the face of an incoming Trump administration, Biden's decisions in the coming months will shape not only his legacy, but also the future of the nation. The time to act is now, and the political fight must begin in earnest. Biden may indeed be poised for a historic move, one that could be the checkmate needed to protect democracy from a Trumpian resurgence.